Welcome to the Catholic Community Scripture Study, held at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church in Jackson, Michigan. I will be your host, Todd Gale, as we walk our way through the book of Genesis, a line-by-line study of the first book of the sacred scriptures. Hello, my friends. Grace and peace be with you. We are in chapter 21 and 22, sort of the pinnacle, at least, of the story of Abraham, if not in the entire book of Genesis. It's taken 25 years for the promise of Isaac to finally come to pass for Abraham and Sarah. The promise of the son was not fulfilled because Abraham was perfect in his obedience, but it was fulfilled because God was faithful to his word. Now remember, originally the name Isaac meant laughter, or he laughs, or laughing boy. So whatever Sarah's laughter was in that first time, whether that was disbelief or whatever it was, this time it is sheer, pure joy. Of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Isaac is the only one that is given his name by God. So he does not get a name change later. God named him originally. So Abraham throws a big party when Isaac is 3 years old. There are some ancient accounts that say that children were not weaned until about 3 years old. That's generally the age that it was thought. Some accounts, though, say 5 or 7 years old. Some even say 12 years old. But the most reliable research tends to say about 3. And because child mortality was so common in the ancient world, it wasn't uncommon to lose a child at various different stages. So celebrating major stepping stones was pretty common, especially when that child is so healthy. Well, Sarah saw her son playing with Ishmael. And some translations say that Ishmael was mocking Isaac. Others say he was scoffing at Isaac. Others say he was playing with Isaac. Well, the Hebrew word here is metzachek, and it's only used twice in the Bible, both times in Genesis, and both times it's a little ambiguous as to exactly what that means. It's probably a play on words, and that we totally miss in the English, because the Hebrew word is got a form of the root of Isaac's name. So it has to do with laughter. So it looks as though they were having fun together. They were playing together. They were laughing. But Sarah just can't stand to see them getting along. Or was Ishmael taunting? Was he testing? Was he teasing? Was he laughing at Isaac? It's a little ambiguous. But even though they were 13 years apart, you can bet that Sarah was just filled with anxiety anytime she saw Ishmael. So the Lord tells Abraham, do whatever Sarah has said. Listen to her voice. Well, according to an ancient law code that's even older than Hammurabi's code, a slave girl and her son are not considered an heir if the slave is set free. But if she remains a slave, her son, any children born to her, will be in the lineage of the master. So Sarah sent them away. And Abraham gave them the most basic of essentials. This seems really cruel. Abraham was a wealthy man, and he could have provided much more. Maybe he just realized that without God's help, no matter what he would give them, it wouldn't be enough. But with God's help, God would see them through. So Abraham let them go. And in verses 15 to 18, God is preserving Ishmael and Hagar in the desert. It's a desperate situation. It seems like anything they do is going to fail. It's a feeling of total abandonment and forsakenness. God heard the voice of Ishmael, which is kind of interesting because specifically it talks about Hagar crying. It's most likely it's a play on Ishmael's name. Remember, his name means God hears. And Hagar has already called God El Roi, the God who sees. This is huge, huge, huge. Even though Ishmael is not the son to receive the covenant promise, God is not against him. The descendants of Ishmael will become a great nation, the Arabic people. And yes, back a few chapters ago, the Lord said Ishi was going to become a wild ass of a man. He was going to be in constant battle. But God also says his people will be a great nation. And he means it. There's been a lot of greatness that have come from the Arab people. And as we've mentioned before, I think God has a major role for the Muslims and the people of Ishmael still. Their story is not over yet. And I really believe the reason that God has said they will be a great people is for the role that's coming, whatever that may be, towards the end times. But this whole situation with Ishmael is just another theme that echoes through the whole Bible. The firstborn son, who should be the heir and should have covenant rights, is somehow overlooked and replaced with the younger son. The younger one finds more favor with the father or even with God directly. Over and over this happens. It already happened with Cain and Abel. It happens here. It'll happen later with Esau and Jacob, with the 11 brothers and Joseph, with the brothers of King David, and on this theme repeats. Also, this little scene is actually a huge setup for what's to come. There are more than 10 specific parallels between Ishmael and in the next chapter with Isaac, where things that happened to Ishmael and Hagar are repeated with almost the exact same words as the things that happened with Isaac and Abraham. We'll do that. It's a little teaser. We'll get to that in just a couple of minutes here. So then Abraham makes a covenant with the Philistine king, again Abimelech. So Abe is now in the south, Abimelech's territory, and he says, because I've dealt with you loyally, I ask that you treat me with the same respect. This is what Abimelech says. And Abraham says, yes, I swear. Now the word here, when Abimelech says, because I've dealt with you loyally, I want to be treated loyally too. The word loyally is usually translated as a little stronger word. Usually it's translated as loving kindness or kindness. In Hebrew, this is chassid. Chassid is kindness. Usually it's the kindness of God. It means like the grace of God, chassid. Later, it takes on the title of being obedient or pious or holy. The Hasidic Jews follow this line, this line of kindness, right? These laws of chesed, right? It's Hasidic. This is one of the major scenes in the early Old Testament where the kings and the rulers of the regions are very moral and very upright and very honest. They have chesed, right? In the Bible, not every pagan is totally filled with evil, just like not every Israelite is totally filled with holiness. This is another theme that runs throughout the Bible. These pagan leaders recognize the holiness of God's people, right? The pagan king and his army commander, they recognize that Elohim is with Abraham. Later on, there's another Abimelech, it's probably not the same one, in Genesis 26, that tells Isaac, God is with you, I can see it. And later in Genesis 30, Jacob is told, God is with you. And again, Joseph in Genesis 39, a non-Israelite says, God is with you. Somehow wise men seek God. Wise men are always seeking God. Remember the wise guys from Matthew's gospel who come from the east? Right? What was it about Abraham and the way he lived and the way he treated people that Abimelech sees something different in him? He comes looking for something more. And that's the call on all of us. The people should see something different in us. Other people should see something alive, something of love, something of chesed, right? Now remember, the setup for this culture in this time, Abe and Sarah have hundreds of people following them, lots of cattle. He has a reputation of leading a mighty army. He's considered most likely a minor king. And they're nomads, they're wanderers into the land of Abimelech. And remember, Abimelech means father king. Father of the king, my father is a king, some version of that. So back in this day, you would make treaties and covenants to assure your safety and your property rights and cooperation with trade and with food and with farmland and whatnot. Well, Abe has chased down armies and he's defeated them. He was directly involved with a total destruction of 2 cities. You can bet Abimelech does not want to cross Abraham. So Abraham brings up the fact that there was a well of water, which had been seized by Abimelech's men. Canaan had no significant rivers. There's no large freshwater lakes down in the south. All the water is dependent upon rain and upon underground wells that were found. Apparently, Abraham was in possession of one of these wells, and Abimelech's servants had somehow taken control of it, and Abraham thought it was rightfully his. He wanted it back. This could have easily escalated into fighting and even bloodshed. Don't just skip past this thinking they were super polite to each other, right? This is a very tense moment. It's very critical for both sides. Abraham has to calculate how strong he will rebuke Abimelech, and Abimelech has to calculate what will be his response. They absolutely need this well. Now, this is not the famous well of Shechem that's in later Sychar, where the woman at the well meets Jesus. That's way up to the north. It's north of the Dead Sea. This is in the southernmost tip of what will later be the land of Israel. So the sheep and the oxen that are mentioned here was probably used as sacrifices to cut the covenant, like we saw back in Genesis 15, where they laid the animals on the ground and cut them in half and they walked between them. Maybe then the other 7 ewe lambs, maybe those are a gift on top of that. It doesn't look like those were sacrificial. Maybe Abraham is, in a sense, paying it forward, right? Because Abimelech and the Pharaoh were so generous to him, giving him silver and animals and all kinds of things of great worth. Maybe he's kind of repaying that chesed, right? That sense of kindness back to Abimelech. And they called this land Beersheba. In Hebrew, beer basically means well, a well of water. And Sheba is an oath. It means to swear an oath. And it's also the word for the number 7. So Beersheba is the well of the oath, the well of the 7. And we will come back here to the southern part of Canaan over and over again in the Bible. Lots of important scenes happen here. Today, it's a very important city, still named Beersheba, right? It's still named the same thing. The number 7 in this scene is so creatively interlaced throughout the story. It's certainly not by accident. This seems to be telling that this is a significant little scenario. There's a lot of detail here. To make an oath is literally to seven oneself. The names Abraham and Abimelech are each used in this story 7 times. And there are 7 ewe lambs that are offered. Isn't that interesting? And Abraham calls on the name of the Lord and they make a covenant. After this successful treaty, Abraham does something that looks forward for decades to come. He plants a very large tamarisk tree. Right? They take a long, long time to grow. So Abraham is basically saying he's going to deepen his roots here. This tree is planted for his descendants. The tree has actually become the official emblem of modern day Beersheba, like that town. It's a tree that has lots of thick white flowers, and it offers very good shade. It's very, very large. Rarely does it lose its foliage. And it's a terrific plant to even feed the flocks from. The leaves are very soft and edible. And here, Abraham gives a new name for God. He calls God El Olam, the everlasting God. This land will later become the land of the Philistines, some 600 to 800 years later. That's the root of the name Palestine. The land of the Philistines becomes Palestine. Well, now we change the chapter to chapter 21, one of the most important and well-known scenes in the entire Old Testament. We call it sometimes the sacrifice of Abraham, or sometimes the sacrifice of Isaac. Christians tend to emphasize here the faith of Abraham. But since he's never killed, our Jewish brothers and sisters call this scene the Akedah. The Akedah is the binding of Isaac. And they emphasize that Isaac is bound, he's tied up, but he's not killed. And there's a willingness of Isaac to lay his life down. There's an extraordinary thing here that I have never seen before. It comes to us from, again, our friend Steve Ray in his commentary on Genesis. All the direct ties to what we just read with the story of Ishmael. And this just underscores the fact that Ishmael is not forgotten. Here's some beautiful connections between chapter 21 with Ishmael and chapter 22 with Isaac. In 21, God orders the expulsion of Ishmael, and in 22, God orders the sacrifice of Isaac. Food and water are taken for the journey in 21, and supplies and materials are taken for the journey in 22. With agony, the firstborn son is willingly given up by Abraham in 21. In 22, with agony, the firstborn son is willingly given up by Abraham. In chapter 21, Ishmael almost dies. In chapter 22, Isaac almost dies. Ishmael's life is saved by divine intervention, and Isaac's life is saved by divine intervention. For the first time, angels call from heaven. And for the last time in the Old Testament, an angel calls from heaven to stop Abraham from killing Isaac. God says, I will make him a great nation in 21. And in 22, he says, your descendants are like the stars and the sand. In 21, Hagar opened her eyes and saw. And in 22, Abraham raised his eyes and saw. And in 21, they are saved by a very fortunate discovery, the well. And in 22, they are saved by a very fortunate discovery, the ram that's going to be offered. Isn't that just fascinating? I would have never caught that. So in the scene with Isaac, the offering of Isaac, the Akedah, supposedly there are 33 connections from this scene directly connected to Jesus and the crucifixion. This is the perfect example of the allegorical sense of Scripture, where there are symbols and deep layers of meaning that all point to Jesus. This is typology. Isaac is a type of Jesus, a foreshadow. Now, I haven't found 33, but I found pretty darn close. So as we dig in, we'll go through some of these. So God tests the faith of Abraham. Dave Guzik, in his commentary, says that God built Abraham slowly, piece by piece, year by year, into a man of faith. Well, why does this happen? Maybe Abraham has grown to love Isaac more than he even loves the Lord. Maybe he was so focused on the promise of the son that he neglected the God of the promise. And God wants to show him where his allegiance truly was, where it would truly lie. Do we ever do that? Do we ever get so enamored with the feelings of prayer that we forget about the one we're praying to? Do we ever get so caught up in the details of working for the Lord that we become an employee for him rather than a friend? The Jews usually say that Abraham was tried 10 times. Well, on this occasion, it looks as though he was tried 10 times all in one. This was agonizing for Abraham. Now, God calls him by name. So Abraham is known. He is seen. And Abraham says, "Here I am," his quick answer, just like Samuel and Moses and Isaiah later in the Bible. God the Father calls to Father Abraham, and Abraham responds, "Here I am." Well, in verse 7, Isaac calls out to his father Abraham, and Abe's response is the exact same. "Here I am." And later in the same story, God calls out desperately to stop Abraham. And he says his name twice, "Abraham, Abraham." And for a third time, Abe says, "Here I am." This is the tension of this whole scene. Abe is here. He's present. He's available to both God and to Isaac. He's available to God the Father, and he's available to his only son, to Abraham's son. Which one does he love more? Or maybe it's not even a matter of loving one more. Maybe it's a matter of having faith in both of them. That phrase, "here I am," is used at least 15 times in the Old Testament. 3 times by Abraham, once by Jacob, once by Moses, and once by Tobias and Isaiah and Ananias, and 5 times by Samuel. And God himself says, "Here I am," at least twice to show his accessibility to us. So God asks that Abraham offers his only begotten son, right? Only begotten son. What does that make you think of? John 3:16 maybe? "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son." It's the perfect setup to understand what's about to happen here. Abraham so loved his God that he gave his only begotten son, Isaac. This is the very first mention of the word love in the Bible. Isn't that interesting? All the way here, chapter 21, chapter 22, first time the word love shows up. In Hebrew, the verb is ahab. Ahab. The noun is ahabah. Ahabah. It's important to see that this first mention comes in the context of the love between a father and a son. It's connected with the idea of sacrificial offering of the son. In this scene, the word father shows up twice, and the word son is used 10 times. Likewise, in the New Testament Gospels, the very first use of the word love in all 4 of the Gospels is a clear expression of the love of the Father for the Son. In Matthew 3 and Mark 1 and in Luke 3 and in the Gospel of John, the very first time the word love appears, it's found in that great verse that God so loved the world, right? It's always connected somehow to the love between the Father and the Son. There's a really well-known Hasidic parable that relates the story of a fisherman who once caught a fish, it was a pike, and he exclaimed, "This will be for the Baron. The Baron loves pike." Well, the pike was extremely relieved to hear this, because he was afraid his life was about to end. So the fisherman brought the pike to the Baron's head chef, and the Baron's chef was so excited. "Oh, the Baron will love this. He loves pike." And so the fish was even more relieved. And there was a surge of anticipation to meet his admirer. But as soon as the chef brought him into the kitchen and a giant knife was raised up over the fish, the pike realized something. The pike realized the Baron doesn't really love me at all. He only loves himself and how I make him feel. True love is other-centered. True love is enduring, right? It's the opposite of infatuation. This offering here of the beloved Son is a love response. And what exactly is a sacrificial offering to God in the Bible? I want to talk about that for just a second. An offering to God, and we've already mentioned this a couple times in the past in other episodes, but I really want to see something here that's important. To offer something of great worth, to offer something of importance, to give it to God in such a way that it can never be used by anyone else. It's a total gift. Now, I really want you to think about that. An offering to God, a sacrifice, is killed and it's burned or it's eaten in a ritual meal. It's a very real, tangible gift that cannot be taken or used by anyone else. It is completely consumed one way or another. Now, throughout this scene, Isaac is going to be referred to in Hebrew as a na'ar. A na'ar is a lad or a young man, meaning he probably was nearing his 20s. The historian Josephus tells us that Isaac is 25. And most scholars think at this point Isaac is actually closer to 30. And God told Abraham to offer Isaac as a burnt offering. This is not an offering it doesn't mean he was burned alive. But first he sacrificed. The life is taken by bloodshed. Then the body is completely burnt before the Lord. Now, human sacrifice would not have been out of the ordinary for the people of Canaan. The priests of many of the Canaanite gods demanded human sacrifice, especially of children. Maybe Abraham had believed that Yahweh was different until now, and now maybe he just assumed Yahweh needed an offering like all the other gods. Abraham's hometown of Ur was a place where human sacrifice was known and was frequent. There's archaeological evidence of this. In Ur, Abraham's family would have served foreign gods. It even tells us this in the book of Joshua. Joshua chapter 24 tells us Abraham and his father, Terah, they would have worshipped the foreign gods. Well, the patron god of Ur was Nana, the god of the moon, and Nana would have asked for sacrifices. Now to us, this whole scene seems really odd. It seems contradictory to kill the very son that was promised as carrying forward a whole generation upon generation of people. That descendants would be uncountable. And God would ask Abraham to kill that very promise. It makes no sense. There's a great rabbi named Solomon ben Isaac, or Shlomo Yitzhaki. He's from around 1000 AD. He's also known as Rashi. We have a lot of his writings. He tells that this story and the call of Abraham is only half the dialogue. This is what he says. When God tells Abraham to take his son, Abraham says to God, well, God, 2 sons have I. So God says, well, take your only son. Abraham says, this is an only son to his mother, and this is an only son to his mother. And God said, take the son whom you love. And Abraham said, both of them do I love. So God made it very clear and said to him, Isaac, and take him to the land of Moriah, on one of the mountains which I shall show you. This is a specific place. God carefully directed this. Now, Moriah is at the center of the Jewish world. It's a hill, a mount of extreme religious importance. 2 Chronicles chapter 3 tells us that Solomon began to build the house of the Lord. He built the temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Jewish tradition has always taught this very spot where the temple is built is the exact same location where God called Abraham to offer Isaac. This is the Temple Mount of Jerusalem, the holiest place in the world for Jews. It's very near where Abraham would have met with Melchizedek. That was just south of this, just south of the hill. And he would have shared the meal of bread and wine in the city of Salem, Shalom. The temple was later built on Mount Moriah over the very site of the binding of Isaac. And in this very location, 4 pivotal events have taken place in the life of the Jews. First of all, Jewish legend tells us thousands of years before Abraham, Adam and Eve were buried they were buried under a western ridge of this very mountain, Moriah. Number 2, Abraham offers his son, Isaac, here. Number 3, 1,000 years later, Solomon builds the temple right on the same spot. This area around the Temple Mount, it was very hard stone, and a lot of the stone around it was excavated and mined for limestone. But there's one peak of that mount that was too hard. The stone could not be easily quarried, so it was just left there as a peak. And on that very site, which was along the roadway leading out from the city of Jerusalem, that was the very site where legend has it, Adam and Eve were buried. And right there was the same spot where Romans chose for public executions. It was called the place of the skull, Golgotha. Today, if you visit the Holy City, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, up on a second level, you can see the stone of Golgotha. And at the base is the Chapel of Adam, where it was believed the blood of Christ ran down to wash Adam clean of his sins. All of this is very nearby the Temple Mount of Moriah. The name Moriah means the land of Torah, the land of teaching, or land of Yahweh. So we have the only begotten Son to be sacrificed at Mount Moriah, all of which are direct connections to Jesus. When we pick up next time, we will see so many other connections to Christ. Right? This is absolutely a spectacular scene, and it only makes sense, at least in most Christian minds, it only makes sense when we realize it was fulfilled in Jesus Christ, the only Son of the Father, who was sacrificed on the hills of Moriah. I'll see you next time. God bless. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for walking with us through this study of the book of Genesis.